Oh boy, here we go. So, Tears of the Kingdom is out and about, and I mean a lot of people are singing its praises, from the casual to the hardcore to everyone in between, as well as the sales. Hooray! But as with Breath of the Wild, there are those not particularly fond of the direction that Tears of the Kingdom takes when it comes to the overall Zelda franchise, and that they prefer the older style of games when talking about the 3D Zeldas, of course. And that's fine, to a degree. But that can of worms is going to be opened up later. But on the cusp of the end of the year awards being handed out to video games, within that chaos, IGN was able to snag an interview with Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma, and it is in the contents of that interview that certain Zelda fans decided to lose their minds. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Since that interview on December 11th, 2023, people have decided to take his answer to a question way out of context and get hurt over it, trying to paint Eiji Aonuma as the villain who's going to ruin the Zelda franchise, or I should say the Zelda franchise at this point, creating long-ass videos and posts and articles over his honest opinion. It's insanity to me. Aonuma, the guy that has been responsible for Zelda games starting with his involvement in Ocarina of Time up until now, is suddenly getting demonized with people saying keep him away from Zelda. Sounds a bit familiar. So let's get into the beef of the matter, yeah? This is HMK, now let's dive directly into the noise. This whole debacle deals with the idea of the previous, more linear style Zeldas, such as Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword, if you want to include it, versus the latest titles to adopt the open-air approach, such as Breath of the Wild and its sequel, Tears of the Kingdom. People's got criticisms on how these games are handled in relation to the previous titles, which is fair when it comes to things like dungeon design, progression, and story presentation, which have had to be adapted to accommodate the more free approach of the game. But some people tend to get their preferences overblown to the point of saying Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were bad games or bad Zelda games, which isn't true in any degree, while conveniently disregarding the aspects that make the games great in the first place. Anyways, this all comes to a head with the now infamous interview with IGN, conducted by Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaru Fujibayashi, the director of Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, and Skyward Sword. When talking about the developmental approach of Tears of the Kingdom and how the game, like its predecessor, allows for more freedom of choice by the player and that the game accepts the route the player decides on when solving puzzles or mysteries, Aonuma was asked on the discussion of preference when it came to older, more traditional Zelda games. His answer apparently have rattled a number of fans and purists to the point where, yeah, now I'm making this video, with people either interpreting or reporting on the idea that Aonuma thinks that linear games are inferior to open games, that their precious criticisms of Tears of the Kingdom have been disregarded due to the idea of nostalgia. So much so that people are calling for Aonuma to step down, that he's wrong, that he doesn't know what he's talking about, completely disregarding all the work he has done for the Zelda series, and how Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are stellar games that happen to be outside of their preferences. Okay. Now here is where context matters, because he didn't say any of what these people are trying to interpret, and it's honestly maddening. Off answering a previous question relating to the approach of Tears of the Kingdom's design in an interview conducted in commending the game's success throughout the year, context is important, IGN asks, "It's interesting to hear you say that, because one of the discussions that I've seen among Zelda fans is, gosh, I miss the more traditional linear Zelda of the past. And I'm wondering, how do you feel about that given the direction of the series toward the very freeform, open-ended kind of design?" Aonuma answers, and to not leave anything out like some people, well, I do think we as a people have a tendency to want the thing we don't currently have. And there's a bit of a grass is greener mentality. But I also think that with the freedom players have with the more recent games of the series, there's still a set path. It just happens to be the path that they choose. So I think that is one thing I kind of like to remind myself about the current games that we're making. But also, it's interesting when I hear people say those things because I'm wondering, why do you want to go back to a type of game where you're more limited or more restricted in the type of things or ways you can play? But I do understand that desire we have for nostalgia, so I can understand from that aspect. That's it. That's literally it. Eiji Aonuma isn't talking about what is superior or inferior, nor did anywhere in the interview mention or even insinuate the context of criticisms. Aonuma is literally talking about his developmental stance and outlooks on the Zelda games, and that he wonders why would players go back to what has been done instead of looking forward to what is new, fresh, and more free. It was all a question of preference, not if the style of game in question is superior or inferior to another objectively. And I get it, Zelda has always been evolving every step of the way, and Nintendo has never been shy in saying that. Remember the reveal for Twilight Princess on the GameCube back in 2004?
Even after 18 years, the Legend of Zelda never stops changing. And this game is not different. We are now taking you to a world where Link has grown up. A world where he will act different and look different. In order to grow, Link must not stand still. And neither can I. So, thank you.
That ideology has continued to persist with The Legend of Zelda throughout the series to varying degrees, but as long as Zelda retains the core aspects of what makes Zelda, Zelda, then it's still Zelda, and that is exploration, combat, and puzzles. An adventure where you must use your tools, fighting ability, and wit to overcome obstacles. All of these aspects are retained in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, now with an added sense of freedom to experiment on the approach of overcoming said obstacles. So of course Aonuma will be perplexed on the idea of going back to what's been done. He never said it was bad, but to continue the essence of this outlook on developing Zelda, of course he will want to move forward with more unrestricted levels of play. Hell, the whole catalyst of the idea that's being peddled by journalists, content creators, and Twitter.x posters isn't even there. Aonuma didn't even bring up the idea of linear versus open in terms of quality, just what has been done before. Basically, that was then and this is now type deals. But of course, you know, on the internet, when you say you prefer waffles, that must mean you hate pancakes. Now that is just a portion of the issue at hand. The other deal where we get even wilder is the statement of nostalgia. That word has become so loaded for some people that they just despise the mention of it. Aonuma states it for the sense of wanting to go back to a previous iteration of Zelda when it comes to the more linear approach versus to where Zelda is now could be attributed to nostalgia, which is literally the definition of the word. But you know, there isn't anything wrong with that or saying that. He even sympathizes with the idea, stating, "But I understand that desire that we have for nostalgia, and so I can understand it from that aspect." Now here is where we're going to get spicy. For some weird reason, disgruntled fans and grifting content creators have somehow got it twisted and attached their criticisms of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom to this statement. Hell, this entire interview for that matter, saying things like Aonuma has disregarded their valid criticisms of Tears of the Kingdom and brushed it aside with the idea of nostalgia, and they have become so up in arms that, you know, I'm here now making this video. Now, the hilarious part is, he never said that. Nowhere in the statement or interview for that matter was the specific or otherwise any criticisms brought up against Tears of the Kingdom. Like, why would it? This was an interview IGN had with Aonuma and Fujibayashi on the heels of the end of the year video game awards being handed out, and Tears of the Kingdom has been very much a part of that conversation. It was simply a question based on preference, not what was objectively better or worse. What a bunch of gamers trademarked decided to get mad over is by latching their opinions on the matter of what they deem as inferior to a point of preference and got their feelings hurt once they inferred that their ideals were disregarded, when none of that happened. In layman's terms, some Zelda fans understood a discussion of preference as an attack on their supposedly valid criticisms when it wasn't. In layman's terms, people got mad over something they shouldn't be mad about. What's even worse about this entire situation is that this idea is indeed being parroted en masse due to online voices, content creators, journalists, influencers, yada yada yada, pushing the notion that isn't even there. Once again, conveniently leaving out the entire context of said interview and inferring a slighted point so askew that they can push said idea and get fans rallied behind a cause that doesn't exist. saying things that Aonuma is blatantly disregarding fans of old, that he said that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom's open-air style is objectively better, which isn't true. Once again, he's stating the idea of moving forward continuously with new gameplay rather than going back. That the idea of Aonuma's words suggests that there isn't any more room for Zelda game styles of yore, and that Zelda is big enough to accommodate all styles. That's not what was said or even inferred. Pushing that idea just screams the notion of being left out due to the perceived concept of your preferred game style not being good enough to be explored in future titles. And because of that, Aonuma is being painted as someone who is out of touch or shedding away what made Zelda great. Except he's not. We literally got a Link's Awakening remake between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And look, they used the updated logo. How lovely! And you know, the absolutely hilarious part in all of this is the revisionist history that I'm seeing with Zelda fans. Not only with the statements Nintendo has constantly been saying in involving the Legend of Zelda's gameplay ideas, case in point where Miyamoto revealed Twilight Princess. Roll the clip again.
Even after 18 years, the Legend of Zelda never stops changing. And this game is not different. In order to grow, Link must not stand still. And neither can I.
But also, when so many are saying to go back to the old, or rather previous style of 3D Zelda games, with the game holding the crown of most mentions, once again being Twilight Princess, well, that was the catalyst back in the day of people starting to say that Zelda was getting stale. Don't try and act like it wasn't a thing. Remember the whole tirade of what was known as the Zelda formula? By the time Twilight Princess came out and about, there were many complaints about the state of Zelda at the time. Now, it should go without saying that people weren't exactly calling Twilight Princess a bad game by any means. People then, and even now, hold it in regards as their favorite Zelda, which is valid. But anyways, the consensus of complaints is that Zelda's formula was getting stale. It was known, at least among the 3D entries, with the formula most games followed was Link doing a couple of dungeons in the beginning, bam, Master Sword, then some big boy dungeons afterwards, and then Ganondorf. This formula in the 3D space was innovated in Ocarina of Time and then utilized in The Wind Waker, and then in Twilight Princess. And by the time of Twilight Princess, people were tired of that and other facets that were being applied to the supposed formulaic approach, including derivative puzzles and oddly specific items that lost their use significantly outside of their intended dungeon after opening the next one. All of this was compounded by the time of Twilight Princess, so much so that Nintendo and the Zelda team had really taken into consideration that notion and seeked to change things up with Skyward Sword, which I always loved, but people hated back in the day. It was only up until HD that people realized it was good. And once again, revisionist history, when people try to claim it was always unanimously beloved back in the day. It wasn't, and that led to the idea of Breath of the Wild, when Nintendo seeked to shake up the conventions known to Zelda, so much so that it was the next big step in evolution, like A Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time was. But HMK, Link's Awakening, you know what I mean. Like, that was the whole marketing point of Breath of the Wild. So all of that in mind, of course Aonuma would be confuzzled at the prospect of people wanting to return to a format that people were complaining about to move on and away from. Nowhere did he suggest or insinuate that it was lesser or inferior to what we have now, which, by the way, what they did insinuate is that after Tears of the Kingdom, the team is now looking to the next thing, whether it be the next big evolution of Zelda or a refinement or adaptation of a previous format. But it's really just the idea of perpetuating a negative standpoint in order to breed the notion that would get popular and discussed no matter the damage it can cause in terms of public outlook and opinion. Dissension is more attractive than cohesion, and in the day and age of social media and content creation, if you feed into people's wilding thoughts and something that confirms their selective bias, you win in that regard. Not only in the moment, but in the idea of becoming a champion of that idea. Whenever people get mad in that or a similar vein, they'll think of you and relish in the thought of you having their back. And at the same time, you start pushing the idea to other prospective fans that would think it's true when it's not. And that idea starts flowing from peer to peer. Oh, you think it wouldn't happen? Bro, we had the whole saga of people inside and outside the internet believing MatPat's theories as fact. And if you want a Zelda take, there are people that unironically believe the Oda meme where they think Aonuma is Oda, you know, the One Piece creator. So don't tell me it wouldn't happen. It's honestly crazy to me that I have to make a video like this, but honestly, I had a lot of fun with it. People's reading comprehension skills and ability to read the room in context really get thrown out of the window for the sake of engagement. And hey, if it was all for the sake of engagement, what does that say? And you know, it's easy to call me a shill that I'm defending Nintendo or a corporation or any of that matter, but what I'm defending is proper context and an ideal. I've criticized Nintendo plenty in the past, and I've always regarded the separation of Nintendo the creative and Nintendo the business, so don't bring that to me if you get your feelings hurt. Tears of the Kingdom is a stellar game, with many qualities people seem to ignore when disparaging it, such as the aggressive combat system, creative control and building, puzzle design within the shrines, improved story progression and characterization, graphical strategy, fidelity, and art style, and I can honestly go on and on. But if you don't like the game for specific qualities, hey, you know, that is completely valid too. But don't try and take away its flowers. But the focal point of all of this is don't come out here trying to claim an avenue of arguments against the developers, especially Aonuma, over something that was never claimed in the first place just because you want to latch your criticisms onto it and then feel invalidated when you hear a certain word or a statement. Zelda constantly moves forward, and that's the point. That's always been an important point for the franchise, to discover new and exciting areas of gameplay and engagement, which at the end of the day truly does encapsulate the gaming development spirit of Nintendo. If you liked the video and if you want to see more like this, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe. If you want to throw me a follow on my other channels, be sure to do so, you won't regret it. Let's ruffle a few feathers. This has been HMK, and as always you guys, stay spicy. I'll check you guys later.